Brew Strong is brought to you by Blickman Engineering, home of the Riptide. Visit them online at blickmanengineering.com.
Brewers, it's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think, Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters. I'm Jamel Zainasheff.
This is Huggy Bear.
And this is TC. You're listening to Brew Strong. Today we have special guest John Hughes with us. We just did a yeast count show. Hopefully you were listening live, and you're listening live again. If not, 2 weeks ago, hopefully you listened to that show. And right now we are doing a mailbag show. And you know, I don't even know if the mailbag works for them anymore, Jamel, but we had that email address for Blickman forever, and we stopped advertising it. Do you know if Drew has access to that new, to that old Blickman email address?
I would assume that he's still monitoring feedback at blickmanengineering.com. And that's your chance to, if you do nothing else to pay for the show, if you could just write a quick email, address it to feedback at blickmanengineering.com, and just say, hey, Drew, thank you for continuing to sponsor the show. I'm a fan of the show. I'm a fan of Blickman Engineering. Appreciate your support. Thank you. Something like that. That'd be great. And, you don't necessarily have to buy anything, but if you just show them that you're paying attention and that the show was listened to, that'd be great. And maybe you do buy some Blickman gear. Maybe you go to their website, see all the amazing things they have, from some of the more basic things in the Anvil series to the more elaborate stuff in the Blickman series. Or if you're looking at going pro, or you're just one of those people that have a lot of drunken friends that you need like a small pro brew system, they got them. They've got everything. They got a really nice 3-barrel that will wheel through a door. So you can get that into your garage or into your basement. You start cranking out, 3 barrels at a time. And, maybe that's enough. I don't know. It depends on how much your friends drink.
Yeah, so, maybe you don't have friends, but you get a 3-barrel brew house, you're going to have friends.
You're going to have friends. There you go. All right.
All right. So as I stated, today is a mailbag show. We do have special guests, John Hughes. And for anyone who wasn't listening, John, can you give a little intro on yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I used to work for Jamil at Heretic. He actually pulled me out of grad school for a summer to build the lab there. And then after I went back and finished my PhD, he hired me on as quality assurance manager. And lately I was working at UC Davis, teaching in and running the Master Brewers Certificate Program for several years. And now I'm doing some writing, doing some consulting, and spending some time with my 1-year-old.
It did strike me. Can you share any details on what you might be writing? Is there a book coming out, or is it still in the early stages, or?
Right now, it's just articles. I have had an idea to write a book on yeast and brewing microbiology. There's one that was by Chris White and some other guy I can't remember, that was just hot garbage. So
that was a load of crap.
No, the book we were using in our curriculum actually was Bolton and Quain. And it was way above what the master brewer students needed. It was written for, yeast microbiologist PhDs. And I just wanted something that was a little bit kind of about halfway between yeast by Zeta Chef and White, and then Bolton and Quain. Something that was just got a little bit more on the technical side, but not so overwhelmingly.
Now, will that be available for brewers and home brewers, or is it going to be like textbook for universities, or how do you expect it to come out?
I'm still kind of shopping it around, but I'm kind of aiming for the textbook side of things, but hopefully not
Mhm.
a $200 textbook. I We'll
Or
see how
like a
that works out.
$500 textbook.
There you
There you
go.
go. So I'll make a special request. Get to that second edition rather quickly, so us homebrewers can buy some used first editions.
You got it.
All right, that's pretty cool. All right, so let's go ahead and start off with a short question. And this one has come up several times. I actually had this question forever ago, and I think we have the best we can do for an answer at this point in time. Hi guys, I hope you can help me with this one. In a recent archive show I was listening to, you mentioned something about Sierra Nevada presenting at the CBC about the level of quality control you should have at your brewery based on your barrel output. Do you know where I could find this presentation or any more information on about it? Thanks so much. I absolutely love the show and will keep on listening as long as it is around. Brew Strong. Andrew. That's right, Andrew. You better be listening. So Andrew, we did some research post last show to find out that the archives for CBC don't go as far back as that presentation was. So to the best of our knowledge, that information, that presentation, it's not easily available unless somebody's done some search since last time. We can't find it. The good news is we're in the midst of a series of lab quality shows where we help homebrewers and pro brewers on various aspects of running the quality labs. Thank you, John. Jamil and Huggy. Travis has pretty much nothing to add to that conversation, but a reasonable amount of stupid questions. Um, so, as a guide, John, you might want to consider something like that. I mean, it struck more than one person's, their thought process, and Jamil presented it about the time Andrew remembers it. Um, it was it. I think the presentation would help you. Like, okay, you're about this big of a brewery, you should be looking at this for your quality. As we discussed the hardware in the last show, don't go spend $1,000 on a microscope to measure yeast as a home brewer. So, but maybe if you're brewing as much as Sierra Nevada, that's a cheap microscope. You need to step it up. Things like that. That's along the lines of I think what that presentation was about, and it does catch people's attention. Um, Anything to add to that concept? I wish would have captured that presentation back when it was available, but we did not.
This is a question I get asked a lot. And I mean I love the folks at Sierra Nevada, and I think that they probably have one of the best quality systems out there. But I've always kind of taken this concept of, volume based necessity for quality equipment or program. It just doesn't quite ring home to me. For me, it's like there's basically a minimum that any brewery should do. And that is, essentially a basic sensory program. But beyond that, then it's just kind of what you are focusing on, what your kind of abilities are, and what your budget is, right? I mean, when I set up the lab at Heretic, I think it was a more involved lab than other breweries of that size. But it allowed us to find issues before we distributed anything. It allowed us to really get a hold of our process and make sure we were, being consistent and doing things right. So, I mean, I have a what you should start with. I don't have exactly basically if you're making, 500 barrels a year, 1,000 barrels a
Hmm.
year, anything like that. But always start with sensory, right? That's a big one. That's easy, relatively. You got to get training on that, but um, Then the easiest way to get started with some actual kind of laboratory analysis, microscope and hemocytometer for counting yeast. We just had a show on that. But then sampling out of your tanks and testing for lactic acid bacteria and Brettanomyces. And you can do that with a medium called HLP. These are what are called shake tubes. They're semi-solid, so you melt this medium, you add, you cool it down, you add a little bit of your beer from a tank, and then you kind of gently shake it to mix it, and then you incubate for 3 or 4 days, and you'll see colonies grow up. Whether you can tell based on the colony morphology whether it's lactobacillus or pediococcus, and then Brettanomyces usually you see growing on the kind of top end of the tube.
Yeah. Um, Page 182 of the yeast book. How much lab does my brewery need? I don't know. I don't know if it's any good or not. I haven't read that, but the the thing I want to add on it is, like John's saying, it's not a volume based thing. Quality is not a volume based thing. Quality is should be more on what you're doing as a brewery. If you're just a well, just if you are a small brewery and you sell all your beer across the bar, then I don't think you need a whole lot more than sensory and some stuff. But you can survive with that, and because you can taste the beer every day and make sure that it tastes good before you serve it to your patrons. If it doesn't taste good, you pull it off, but you need to taste it every day. If you get to the point where you're putting beer in containers like bottles or cans, and then you're selling them to people to take away, well, you're going to need a bit more lab work on that, because you don't want exploding cans, you don't want leaking cans, you don't want sour beers going out, things like that. If you're selling your beer to a distributor, local distributor, and it's going into the stores or something like that, well, then you're going to need to step up your game even more on quality control. Because if you start sending out cans that get fluffy and start getting larger and larger, on the grocery store shelf, you're going to have problems. You're not going to have distribution for long. So you really need to up your game at that point, because it's going to take longer for the beer to get consumed. And there's, the storage is not going to be perfect. You're going to end up with problems if you're not watching that. And, the same thing goes if you're sending out kegs to, local taverns. And the further out you send your beer, the more, rigorous you need to be in your lab work and your quality control. Because you send beer over to Japan, they know when it's bad beer, and they're really critical of beer quality. So you need to make sure that what you're putting in your container is as perfect as you can make it and will stay as perfect as possible. So that's more where I go on, what lab controls do we need? What quality assurance measurement should we be making on our beer? So hopefully that helps.
You two are actually
size,
prepped.
Huh?
You two are prepped for a presentation on that, a full quality lab show on the lab required. I mean, I'm sorry we held on to this one for so long. I mean, we hadn't approached it in this way.
We should write a book together. Which
y'all should write a book together. I will do.
Which we proposed, and then they said no, and then they had somebody else write it. Really kind of sucked. Yeah,
for a cheaper price, probably.
I don't know.
Right. So it sounds like also with with your especially if you're once you do distribution, the further out you get, it's harder and harder especially if you have to do a recall for safety or for quality. And the further out you get, the harder it is to do that recall. So you want to be more and more sure that you're not going to have to do a recall. You're not going to have to pull anything back or replace anything.
I'll tell you, we we were making cocktails and we were using, lemon juice as one of the ingredients in the cocktails. And we started getting complaints from, I think it was Thailand. And, that they started smelling like butt. I don't know. And sure enough, they we were using a lemon juice that had like no additives or whatever, and then somehow got mixed in this lemon juice with sulfur, treated with sulfur to as a like a preservative, antibiotic, antibacterial, right? Well, when that sits warm, it gets really foul. So,
Wow.
Thailand's warm, and so I had to essentially buy back a pallet of of cans of cocktails, and the cocktails were pricey. They had high alcohol in them, and they were all these fruit ingredients. I had to buy back a pallet of that, plus the shipping that it took them to ship across the ocean, plus the taxes that get charged. A lot of these countries charge huge taxes on alcohol that's coming in. And so I had to pay for all of that. And, had to, of course, apologize to our distributor there, which, they were really nice. So they were okay with it. But yeah, it can cost you considerably more than you think, because it's not just the ingredients, it's not all the packaging and the labels, and it's the shipping, it's the taxes, it's everything.
And then your
And your
reputation too.
reputation. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that can happen.
That great stuff. All right, let's take our first break and we'll be back in just a minute.
Back to the two guys that know how to turn beer into beer. This is Brew Strong.
And we're back, and we're live on Facebook. Hope you're watching, and if you're not, maybe you'll catch it in the next 30 days before this video disappears. And if not that, then at one of your podcast locations, your favorite source for podcasts. And this next question is a recap of the last show. And I thought a couple times about asking it or not. Jamil, as you pointed out, we could have included it. But people will come back to these shows and they might hit a Q&A versus hitting the lab. So let's go ahead. And this is kind of a recap of our last show. So if you don't get enough out of our answer on this, go back and listen to that last show. It's outstanding. So we have this email from Ryan. Could you cover the process of counting yeast cells? How much do I collect? When should I dilute? What do I dilute? And how much do I dilute? When and how do I use the blue dye? How do I calculate the total per mL's yeast I have after everything is said and done? Please help. I would love to be able to remove another variable from my brew day and make a consistent pitch every time. Thanks for all you guys do, Ryan. Be in Army Desert Division. Scratch that part. And the Brewing Army thanks you for your subscription.
Yeah, just listen to the previous show. There's your answer.
Yeah, because it is quite the show. And associated with that show is John's spreadsheet that we've shared that assists you in the counting.
Yeah, that spreadsheet. And I think White Labs also has a good write-up on the method as well. If you do a search for like White Labs yeast counting, they'll have a description of what they recommend. But
I will say actually one thing that came up for me hearing this question that we didn't touch on in the last show is when he said, how do I calculate the total mLs of yeast I have after everything is said and done? And that's actually a good point. And this is true. I see a lot in commercial breweries and for home brewers. You may not have an accurate volume measurement of your yeast. So what you can do, so we talked about yeast counting, for the whole hour last time. And what we always talked about was getting up to that cells per milliliter, cells per milliliter of slurry. But what you can do is you can start out, instead of starting out with a number of milliliters of your slurry, you can start out with a number of grams. And then when you back calculate everything, you now have cells per gram rather than cells per milliliter. I think it's a lot easier to aseptically measure weight than it is volume. And so if you have, a weight of your yeast, then you can back calculate and you know how many grams and therefore how many cells of yeast you have.
Like that.
That's an excellent point. I think somewhere in the yeast book, I put in the weight of a cell of yeast, average weight of a cell of yeast, and you could calculate out how many cells based on the between that and just the spent beer or whatever the liquid is. The only problem with that is the amount of non-yeast material that might be in there. If you got hops in there and coagulated protein and stuff like that, that's always going to throw it off a bit. But yeah, I think that's an excellent point, John, about calculate it out per gram, and then you can just weigh your bucket or your Nalgene bottle or whatever, and there you go. You would know how much you have.
And if you're doing it all in grams, you don't need to worry about density, right? You don't have to do any kind of volume, right? You just do everything in grams.
Correct. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I
much
see this
easier.
in commercial breweries, especially that if they use like an old converted keg as a yeast brink. It's way easier to you have the tare weight on your yeast brink, and then you just weigh it after you
Mhm.
fill it. Then when you pull a sample to count, you know what you got.
Good stuff. And also go back and listen to that last shit because it is outstanding.
There you go.
Yes.
All right. Doug writes in, Aloha Jamil. Although
Aloha.
although you've probably addressed this question a million times already, when in hell is Amazon going to offer your yeast book as an ebook? I love the ebook format, and there's no going back for me. As soon as your yeasty pulp fiction is available via Amazon Kindle edition, I'm getting me the kind and telling a million other blokes to go for it. You lost me on some of that. Thanks and cheers, Doug. All right, so
There's a Kindle.
yes, there is. And I just wanted to make sure that that information was out there. That's why
Probably
I
that
included that
question
in the
was
show.
probably from a long time ago. I don't know.
Up last week before.
Yeah, yeah. The Kindle version is how weird. The Kindle version is 22 cents more than the paperback version.
Electricity's getting expensive these days.
Yeah, that's odd. It must be popular, and so they're just driving up the price, I guess.
Yeah, I have it.
So it's,
I
it's $17 US as of this recording. That's not too bad.
You need to do an
Well,
audio
that's-
version where you read it.
Huh? Huh?
Yeast. Let me tell you about yeast.
Yeah, I have it. I have most books I buy are along the lines of brewing. I usually buy the hand, the paperback because I want it in the digital, so I can get it wherever I'm at on a laptop.
Why is the
or
paper
a
version?
tablet.
Because he wants people to think he reads and he's educated.
You're not far off there.
But those on the shelf,
No, in the post-apocalyptic world, I want to have my books. When there's no power, when I'm rubbing the sticks together to start a fire to brew beer, I want to have
You're
my
gonna be
books.
reading about yeast.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm going to have to propagate something from somewhere.
There you go.
All right. Thanks, Doug. Hopefully you have found it, and anyone who hasn't found it, go straight to Amazon. It's been there for a while. All right. From Dave. I've been considering starting to top crop my yeast. However, since I can only brew one beer at a time, I'll need to store it for a while as the beer finishes. I'll be keeping it in a fridge, most likely in a conical flask or jar. Should I just store the yeast in the container with just the cropped material, or should I add something to help keep it more viable? Sterile water, boiled DME, etc. Thanks heaps for your advice over the years. Your and White's yeast book is what inspired me to start doing this instead of my past practice of dumping on the yeast cake. Cheers.
Nice,
Dave.
Dave. I depending on how long they want to store it, I would just put it all in a. I guess he's saying in the container. I would just store it in the container. I wouldn't add anything to it. When you top crop, you do get some beer in there. Um, I don't know if it's just somehow lifted up in around the cells in the yeast, but when you top crop it and then it kind of settles out, you'll see that there's beer in there too.
Okay, so we get a couple things in the last show I think that apply to this. One thing he stated is sterile water, and what I hadn't overly considered is sure sterile, but like probably not distilled, John.
I mean, yeah, there's enough. I mean, first of all, I don't think there's any need to add sterile water. But if they did want to, there's probably enough beer in that top crop that you're not going to run the risk of causing a osmotically stressful
Okay.
situation. But the several things that kind of come up for me on this. One is, you look at any top cropping scheme, and there's always what's called the brown hefe. Um, it's really like cold break and some hot break that kind of rises to the top and is sitting on the top of that krausen. And usually people will let that go before they top crop their yeast. In a home brewing setting, that might be a little more difficult. So um, just be warned that you might have some additional stuff in there. But the other thing is that, I mean, one of the benefits of top cropping yeast is that you have yeast that are in the prime of their fermentation state. And so there's no lag phase. They are ready to go and they're rip rock roaring very quickly on that next batch. If you're going to store them for a while, you're kind of wasting that potential. But the other thing is that yeast have an internal energy storage called glycogen. So it's a polymer of a highly branched polymer of glucose. It's actually very similar to amylopectin, one of the starches that you find in plants. Um, but it gets depleted at the beginning of a fermentation. So during that sort of lag phase, the yeast are sort of waking up. They're using their internal glycogen store, um, and that helps them protect them from the high osmotic pressure of the wort. So the wort has a high sugar content. It's going to be a little bit stressful for them. Um, if you are top cropping, you're not giving the yeast enough time to build up that glycogen storage. They tend to use it up at the beginning of a fermentation and then build it back up towards the end of a fermentation as they're
Going
flocking
dormant.
out.
Yeah.
So, so that might be, you might end up having not very viable yeast with that if you're storing them for a while. In that case, I would think about doing a starter from that, adding some dry malt extract, or basically wort you can make from dry malt extract, and give them a chance to kind of grow up, maybe aerobically, make sure they have some good strong cell membranes and whatnot.
To, to that end, would he be better off trying to rinse a portion of his yeast cake and using that instead of trying to top crop?
That's what I would think. That's where I was going to go. Is that, I mean, if you're storing for a while anyway, you're not
Mhm.
concerned with time, then just let them settle and collect some of those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think if you're brewing later, let me overthink this. If you're brewing like a week
Hang
later,
on.
I think you're okay. Top crop yeast is seriously healthy. The point where the glycogen reserves are best loaded up, or it's kind of like almost at the peak of fermentation, and it happens when the yeast start getting chilled down, and that's when they build their glycogen reserve. So when you go to like White Labs or White Yeast or one of the 30 different yeast producers that exist now, they'll tend to do it at a very specific point to maximize the glycogen in the yeast cells. And it's not towards the very end of fermentation, but a little bit before that. So it's not ideal for the beer that you're brewing. You can store yeast in sterile distilled water for a long time. Not major amounts of yeast, but Pasteur did a thing where he put some cells of yeast in sterile distilled water, and he had them on his shelf at room temperature for, I don't know, what was it? Was it like 30 years or something? It's some crazy long time. And then the yeast were still viable and fine at the end. It was, so they have the ability to, as long as they're, I don't know what it is, but they they have like, they'll use their glycogen reserves very slowly to maintain, their lives. They tend to do a lot more when they think that, they're going to ferment. So if you start adding in sugars, then they're like, all right, time to ferment. And so they spend their glycogen reserves getting ready to, ferment, use up the sugar to bud and all that stuff. And the problem with that is if you're not providing them a large environment to do that, then you can just kind of burn them out. But if they're just kind of sitting there, they know that they're done. So yeah, I think you can, you can pull off, and most of the time you're top cropping, it's somebody who's brewing British ales. So you're good for a week because your beer is going to be done before that. It's most British fermentations are 2 days, 3 days tops. So I don't know. It depends on so many things. I think John's right. There's a lot of other things to consider. You may just be better off getting a slurry from the bottom. I like top cropping. It's like the healthiest yeast you can get. So
you both kind of pointed in one direction, coincided perfectly. His question on adding boiled DME to the top crop, the answer to that is, if you want to wake it up, fine, but not now.
Right.
When you pull
Correct.
it, don't dose it now. If you want to hit it with DME, and you probably should do it to at least wake it up. If you don't grow it with a starter, not now, later.
That's correct.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember when I was taught pulling yeast, we always wanted to put a little bit of beer on top to kind of protect it from oxygen and I guess what else, kind of thing.
Well, isn't there, when you're pulling yeast, isn't there always just beer that rises to the top once it settles?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
It's
hard to get just yeast off of anything.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
I have accidentally top cropped. I guess I've had yeast
Accidentally
and
top
guaranteed,
crop?
yes. Well, you all have done this. When your fermentation's so damn happy, your yeast shoots out the top, ends up in your ends up in your airlock, etc. And when that separates, there's definitely the color of the beer. It settles out of it. Yeah. So yeah, you got some beer foam mixed in with that yeast foam.
Yeah, there's a little bit there's a thin layer of beer that's in between those bubbles and all that in that top crop. And so when you top crop, the beer comes out of it. The yeast compact down once the gas is kind of gone, and then you see a layer of beer on top. So
Good stuff. All right, Dave, very much appreciate that question. And let's go ahead and take a break. We'll be right back. Some more questions from the mailbag.
Are you looking for a simple brewing system that's great for all grain brewing, but everything on the market seems to be full of compromises? Blickman Engineering has the answer. The Blickman Brew Easy All Grain Brewing System. The Brew Easy is a complete system with easy upgrades and a beautiful compact design, perfect for any size brewing location. At its core, the Brew Easy is built on 2 gorgeous Blickman Boilermaker brew kettles, a high-temperature March pump, and either a top-tier gas burner or the new Boil Coil electric heater. The Brew Easy adapter lid allows the pots to stack stack on top of each other, forming an efficient, strong, and compact brewing setup that comes in 5, 10, and 20-gallon batch sizes. Upgrade your Brew Easy system with full automated control by adding a Blickman Tower of Power temp controller, and make moving around easy with the Blickman Kettle Cart. The Brew Easy is modular. If you already own a Boilermaker kettle, you can build your Brew Easy by purchasing just the modules you need. The new Brew Easy all-grain brewing system. See it today at BlickmanEngineering.com and brew with Blickman quality on your new Brew Easy.
Back to the beer guys that make other beer guys look like wine guys. Brew Strong.
And we're back here live on Facebook. Hope you're tuned in. If you're not, you'll catch us on the podcast with special guest John Hughes answering from the mailbag. Yeast-related questions for the most part, but it may not continue entirely the whole show. But catch the last show, which was all about yeast counting. It's a great show.
Now, I got a question. This being the BN, shouldn't we be calling it the Mailsack, not the Mailbag?
So it was JP's recommendation to try that mailbag, and I think part of it was trying to filter out, when the shows started to go downhill when I took over. But
a new name. Yeah, why are we still calling this Brew Strong?
Do you want to call it Brew Medium?
Brew Medium. Brew okay.
Brew okay if you feel like it.
It's fine. That's what we should call it. It's
Brew
fine.
is fine. It's fine. Well, Brandon did not write in for an "it's fine" answer, but he did write in. All right. Brandon writes, often when I brew up a higher gravity Belgian ale, I will add any simple sugars in the recipe towards the end of fermentation to maximize attenuation. I'm curious though, if I'm initially over pitching my yeast because the OG I'm pitching for isn't actually the one I'm pitching onto. For example, I have a Belgian Golden Strong with 15% simple sugars and an OG of 1075. So I make the starter for that OG, even though at the time of pitching, my gravity will only be 1058. I have read that the majority of flavors are developed from the beginning growth stages of fermentation. So is doing this perhaps detrimental to the flavor of my beers? If I pitch for 1058, wouldn't the yeast have already grown up sufficiently enough to easily ferment any simple sugars I introduce later on in fermentation?
I think short answer is yes. I would probably. I mean, if you're brewing a Belgian ale, chances are you're going to want that estery quality. You get that from growing yeast. So I would say pitch based on your actual gravity of whatever 1058, and then I mean the yeast will in any typical batch you'll get about 3 doublings, so you'll have about 8 times as much yeast by the time you've added in your additional 15% simple sugar. So, I mean, really, if it depends on what you want out of this. I mean, I know people that intentionally underpitch Belgians and Hefeweizens because they want to get as much ester quality as they can. I like a little more kind of restrained. I like to be able to detect it, but not be overwhelmed by it. And so I tend to pitch straight. So, if you want that really super estery quality, then keep it low, pitch based on that, or even under pitch. If you like how they're turning out by kind of over pitching, it's definitely possible to be detrimental in over pitching. But if you're going from 1058 to 1075, the calculation there isn't going to be enough to really cause any serious problems. It's just going to kind of tone down that estery quality. That's my take.
Yeah, I'm with John on this. You're fine just using the calculation for your starting gravity. The additional sugars that you're adding in, it's not going to be a problem for the yeast as long as the yeast are healthy and active, you'll be fine. I wouldn't. And if you went either way, it's not going to be that much of a problem. Yeah, I think you may reduce your ester production, or but if you go higher, but it's really hard to overpitch. I mean, you have to add an absolute crap ton of yeast to really mess up fermentation. So if you're worried about it, you can go to the higher amount. But I always tell people, yeah, you just go with whatever your starting gravity is, unless you're doing something really weird, like your starting is like you're making a 1030 beer and you're gonna add enough sugar to make it like a 1-1.
5 gallons of
You're doing
honey.
something like that, then maybe you need to pitch more yeast, or you can pitch more yeast, somewhere along the process with the sugar. But in most cases, you just go with whatever your starting gravity is.
Would that be the same, you think, for like a triple IPA, quadruple IPA, strong barley wine? Same kind of thing when you're doing the staged additions later. I know you still want to pitch plenty of yeast, but would you still target your initial gravity as your calculated, pitch rate kind of thing
Generally,
for those huge beers?
yeah, generally that's what we always did. It just depends. Again, I think that there might be a thing in there where maybe we could come up with a rule. It's like if your sugar additions are, you know, 2 or 3 times what your original gravity is, well, then you need to pitch more yeast. If it's less than X number of times of your initial gravity, then you're fine with your initial gravity. But yeah, I almost always I think it's fine to just go with whatever your initial gravity is.
Yeah, with the
I had,
caveat on the triple IPA type of thing is that, I would tend to overpitch those
Pitch a little
just
heavy. Yeah.
just because it's going to be pretty high sugar content and stressful for the yeast. But it wouldn't be based on the additional sugar additions. It would just be based on the fact that it's a high starting gravity already.
Mhm.
Is- So
I had
these
one question. When you're adding lactose, the lactose is not fermentable, but you're still bumping up your gravity. Does that still affect the yeast performance? Will the yeast be more stressed out by the same wort, one with lactose and one without lactose? Are you going to get different performance out of that yeast?
The osmotic stress will be the same whether they can ferment it or not. Um,
so they'll try to pull
the
lactose in, even though they can't do anything with it,
No, they
or
won't pull it in. It's just that
they'll
the
feel the need to,
water,
the pressure,
If
yeah,
it's
the density
if
outside
you
of the
if you
cells
put a
versus density
huge
inside the
amount
cells.
in, yeah, it could be a problem. And actually, a little bit of lactose will ferment. I think there's some minimal amount that gets fermented from
Interesting.
most of the lactose powders that are provided. But it's just like almost always, like how they make Cinnamar.
Mhm.
Essentially mash and ferment, roasted barley, or black patent malt or whatever. And you wouldn't think there's anything to ferment there because it's all burnt,
Mm-hmm.
but they ferment it out and they get like 0.4% alcohol.
Interesting.
So there's always a little bit that ferments. But yeah, if you're not going with like a crazy high osmotic, pressure, if you put in like, 5 pounds of malt and then, 40 pounds of lactose, I think, yeah, that's going to mess with the yeast. But most recipes that you would do, will be just fine. It won't affect the yeast enough to cause a problem, I think.
So with Huggy bringing in the triple, quadruple IPA, bringing both of these together, Jamil, I recently, or somewhat recently, recall your statements on dosing IPAs, making them larger and larger, and how you treat the beer other than just adding the sugars. You tend to add nutrient and add oxygen at certain phases. Would you do the same well, it's really generic, but in his case, he's adding
Mm.
1058 to 1075 sugar. Are you going to try to hit it with oxygen at that point in time, especially if you've only hit it with enough oat, yeast for the 1058? Does the yeast need that? Will it help?
Um, the yeast will certainly use any oxygen you provide. And depending on the nutrients, it could also utilize some of the nutrients. Um, but, 1058 to 75, I think you've said it's something like 15%. Um, it's really not that bad. If you're getting good attenuation and it's finishing out and nice and dry, then I wouldn't worry about it. If it's not, if you're really pushing it, we did some beers up to like 18% or something like that. What was whale juice, John? It was 18%, I think.
That was after my time.
Was it? Oh
Yeah.
yeah. We kept. I was on this kick of, hey, we'll just add 2% to these beers, and we'll call it something else. And so we were doing this. We did amnesia juice, which I think turned out really good. And I think we whale juice was. I think amnesia was 16%. Whale juice was 18%. And I had something else that was going to be 20%. Never got a chance to do it. But, we would make a slurry of dextrose. We had a dextrose slurry calculator. And then, which actually you can find on the Mr. Malty website,
Hmm.
posted there.
I wish I'd known. I made my own. I could have used yours. It's
And
probably more
then,
accurate.
well, because I'm sure I had John do the lab work to determine the maximum amount of dextrose that could be dissolved at a given temperature. And you remember doing that?
Oh, yeah, probably.
Right?
You got
And
me doing
then
all kinds of wacky shit.
that's true. But yeah, so if you're really pushing, something like that, then yeah, some oxygen. And the nice thing about oxygen is you can stir the beer with it as well.
Hmm.
um, and help make sure that the sugars are evenly dissolved. And the yeast just take it up in a heartbeat, and you don't end up with oxidized beer.
Right.
As long as there's active fermentation, you don't really have a problem.
Yeah, so running quick numbers in my head, he's adding somewhere just north of 2 pounds of his simple sugar into 5-ish gallon batch. So probably if he's fermenting at six and a quarter, it's about 2.5 pounds. Gets him his 15% bump, his 1058 to 1075 bump. So it's not a large amount, it's not a small amount. It's a solid
Mhm.
amount for that style of
Yeah.
beer. So you can oxygenate and you can even use it to help mix. You might not need to for that amount, but if we go back to when you address the making of beer such as whale juice, consecutive sugar additions, your recommendation was add some oxygen as necessary and add some nutrient as necessary. Um,
You certainly can. Yeah, the nutrient is, you don't want to overdo the nutrient, but yeah, nutrient
right.
can be quite helpful. In my latest book, Modern Homebrewer, available from Camera, the in England, and I think they have it on Amazon as a download or something. I go through the calculations for nutrients and stuff for big ass beers like that.
Excellent book. All right. Brandon, thanks for writing in. Okay.
One of my friends bought it.
I read it before I bought it.
That's
All
true.
right.
Travis was very helpful in reviewing the text before it went to the publisher.
Yeah, I just kept getting all these notices where suggestion rejected, suggestion.
Hey, you were mentioned in the book
I
for
appreciate
your
it.
help.
No, I did read it. I did my best to help you guys bring it together. Just some touch ups here and there, and I know I can't imagine writing a book. Good luck, John. But should I write a book, I sure as hell hope somebody would read it before I send it out to the public.
That's a fact.
Yeah, those that eyes really helps. Okay, Richard asks, guys, I've been reading anecdotes online regarding the importance of hitting a target pH in the kettle, but there isn't a lot out there explaining why that's important, what to target, when and what to use to achieve a desired kettle pH. Adjust at the beginning of boil, and I think this would make a good show idea. I think we could hit a couple moments of where we care about pH. And if we bend this towards post boil, John, you might be able to talk about something we don't talk about a lot. Because I can say there's quite a bit written about mash pH. And so, Richard, I'm disappointed you probably did not read Palmer's book in any of the 4 versions, one of which is online for free, but not the good version. Buy the new version. Uh, there's a lot of talk lately about hitting boil pHs as a encouraging of pronouncing hops. But I know very few, if almost any home brewers that look at post boil pH and consider what's going to happen as we ferment. As we just talked a whole lot about yeast. Any comments?
Yeah, I'd say on the topic of kind of post-boil pH, it's, I mean, the first thing the yeast are going to do once you pitch them is they're going to drop it even more. Um, and your pH should drop pretty steadily throughout that fermentation, um, to somewhere in the low 4 range, 4.1, 4.2. Um, where you can run into some issues is if you are doing a very heavily dry hopped beer. Um, and I only know these numbers at commercial scales, but for every pound per barrel of dry hops you put in, that is equal to about a zero point 0.1 pH increase. And so, you get some of these hazy IPAs out there that they're dry hopping at 5 pounds per barrel, and that's a half a pH point, which is not insignificant. And your your bitterness is going to be kind of harsher and less pleasant in the higher range. You're also kind of getting into the slight danger zone in terms of high pH. You're not going to be preventing certain microbial growth as much as the lower pH of. Um, I've seen a lot of people dose with something like phosphoric acid to bring the pH back down, especially on those IPAs, so you get that nice kind of clean bitterness. I admit I don't know if you do a pre-adjustment of your pH. So let's say um, you start out with a pH of post-boil, a pH of 5. If you bring that down to 4.7, I don't know if that's going to preemptively prevent dry hopping increase. I think that there's quite a bit of buffering power going on in that wort, but that would be something really interesting to look into.
Yes, that's a great point because it's kind of like if during your mash, you want to catch that pH measurement up soon because the mash is kind of going to do what it wants to do eventually, but it's going to taste different if you don't try to correct it up front. From my limited experience, so the yeast is only going to bring So let's say the yeast wanted it to be 4.2. If you start at 5, it might bring it to 4.2. If you start at 4.7, it still might only bring it to 4.2. So when you add your hops, and I
Yeah.
did it, you disagree?
Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, and I did a
I'll
quick
tell you
calc.
when you're wrong. I'll tell you how wrong you are
Sure, sure,
once you're
sure.
done.
Yeah, so I did a quick calc, and that point one is about 3 ounces and 6 gallons of beer. So 3 ounce dry hop bring you up point one, 6 ounce dry hop bring you up point two. That's a pound per barrel roughly. Um, so biologically, my expectation would be that if the yeast wants it to be 4.2, it's going to do its best to get it to 4.2. If you pre-dropped it, it's not going to try to go much lower. Jamil's going to tell me how wrong I am. We got that one covered. And I know that, Jamil. That's why I don't mind saying what I'm thinking, because you're going to clean it up at the end.
Well, no. All right. I had a whole bunch of stuff I was going to say, but
The
now I can't
stupidity
remember.
just blew it out your mind.
No, but generally, a lot of the mash uh, is actually a lot of the things that happen in the mash happen better at a higher pH.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the idea is like you're saying, or John was saying, is to kind of hit around 5.0, at the in the kettle, and
Mm-hmm.
then you or at the end of the boil, you get down around 5 or maybe a little bit under. That's kind of the reason why the mash should be at a lower pH. But if you don't get to there, you can always adjust with an acid to get to around 5, and then the yeast will take it down to in the fours. Lagers tend to be lower, in the 4.2, 4.3 range, and ales tend to be a little higher. But yeah, adding the dry hops, excessive dry hopping will drive it up. I had a friend who owns a brewery. I went and tasted one of his beers, and I'm just like, man, that is harsh. I said, what's the pH on this thing? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, you're not checking the pH of your finished beer. Yeah, it was a small brewery. We checked it. Sure enough, pH was quite high. It was like 4.7, 4.8, something like that. I said, just add a little acid to. Let's get a pint of beer. Let's add a little acid. Let's drive it down to 4.3, 4.2, and see how it tastes. And sure enough, at 4.3, it tasted great. I'm like, yeah, like John was saying, it can be really harsh if you let your pH get too high. So that's one of the reasons that pH is very important in the finished beer. But you can adjust it with, lactic acid, phosphoric acid. Heck, you could probably use hydrochloric acid from your swimming pool supply. Yeah,
Please
but,
no.
Uric acid.
muriatic acid. Never hurt
You
anybody.
guys, man, can't take you anywhere.
Yeah, I know I target in the kettle. I've heard that lower pH going into the fermenter, even with the yeast dropping it, you'll still drop it a little. It'll go lower
Yes.
even after dry hopping. So
Right.
the yeast doesn't cancel it out or buffer it out or anything like that. So yeah, you can target a lower pH. I know I've also heard lower pH in your whirlpool when you add your whirlpool hops can pull out some more expressive, more like tropical fruity notes, more citrusy notes, more fruity notes out of the hops at a lower pH compared to a higher pH. And then I also wanted to come back. Richard was asking about the pH of the kettle. I know at the beginning of the boil, I've heard, and I think I've seen this too. Lower pH during the boil you'll have less color development with a lower pH versus a higher pH. So if you're striving for a lower color, which a lot of the modern IPAs are nowadays, if you have a lower pH at your beginning of your boil, you should develop a little bit less color.
I had not heard that one. But so I don't know that there's any science behind it. Then and I'm not even going to say I read it on the internet, but people told me, and we're talking about it. some time back, I started targeting about 5.0 pH at the beginning of my boil on all my hoppy beers. And every time of course, I'm not, my mash is always ending slightly higher than it starts, somewhere between 5.2, 5.3, maybe up to 5.4. And so I'm always doing a little bit of, because he asked, a little bit of phosphoric. I use phosphoric because it's strong and I have a bunch of it. And I don't notice any flavor from it whatsoever. So I
Hmm.
use very small amounts of phosphoric to bring my pH down to about a 5.0 at the start of boil.
Hmm. Yeah, and the whole color thing and pH. I don't know if the rest of you guys drink tea, but if you make yourself a cup of tea and then squeeze a bit of lemon into it, you'll see the color will brighten up and lighten
Hmm.
up considerably because the the lower the pH, the less the color of that thing. So makes sense. But I think that can also be done at any time. I don't think it
So
has to
even
be.
after, yeah,
Yeah,
even after the fact, you'll get less color, huh?
I think so. Um, but yeah, I think it's a good question.
So
Uh,
we have James in the chat. He drops his boil pH with acid for protein. He puts coat reasons. James, is that a typo? Protein coat reasons. He doesn't think the end of boil pH is as important as to the final pH as the yeast. Point taken. As Jamil is saying, he finds that when he uses a hef yeast, for instance, it doesn't matter what my end of boil pH was. My pH at the end of fermentation, coagulation, okay, is lower than either ales or lagers. Going back, so protein coagulation, he finds the pH, lower pH helps with protein coagulation. Now, I have not done a side by side on that, and I haven't read anything on
Mm.
that. John, you're kind of shaking your head. Have you read on
Yeah,
that?
yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. I mean, it's the same process like in, making yogurt or um shoot, even mozzarella cheese, right? I mean, as an acidic environment is going to lead to proteins kind of glomming together, coagulating. They get more hydrophobic, so that as the pH is lower, you get more protons attaching onto those, so they become less charged, more hydrophobic, and they clump together. So
So, so
I
low
think,
pH is win-win-win in your word, it sounds like, as far as we can tell. Very
yeah, that's
cool.
why you want to target the right the right pH at the
Right.
end of the mash.
Am I the only one though? I mean, my mash always climbs in pH,
Oh
just a
yeah,
little bit, but
Oh, yeah,
always.
as you
as you
sparge.
sparge. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess yeah, it's valid. Now I do pre-specify my sparge water, and I don't use a whole lot of sparge because I'm using the anvil, and most people do full volume. I don't do full volume, but I come up. My wort's just a touch higher than my mash is always. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, just a touch, a little more phosphoric. All right, let's take our final break and be back. Wrap it up. Hopefully, I can find a short question we can discuss. These brains on, it's hard to find anything that's short because there's so much information coming out of it. Uh, all right, we'll be right back.
Learning to brew has never been so disgusting. This is Brew Strong.
And we're back and we're live wrapping up our mailbag show, or what did you want to call it? Our mail sack show,
Mailsack.
Jamil?
I think for the BN, anything should be a sack.
I mean, we could just call it our nut sack
Anytime
if we
there's an
wanted to.
opportunity to call something a sack,
We're back in the sack. Gonna
back in the sack. Actually, I like that even better. Would be mailbag. It's like we're grabbing the sack.
I regret saying it. Uh, what is this? We'll look back and laugh at it. What is it? What's the saying? We'll laugh at this one day. Something like, I don't know. Anyway, all right.
Hey, I'm laughing at it now.
I am too.
That
I
shows
am.
my level of maturity. So,
I think in our short term, what I had prepped, sorry, gents, I don't know if I have anything else I can bring up towards yeast. So let's wrap it up. Stepping into all grain, I think we can tackle this one. Joseph says, "Hello, I've been
Hello.
extract brewing for 2 years and looking to move on to all grain brewing. Have the following questions. I will need to get a burner and a bigger pot for the full wort boil. The question is sizing. Should I get an 8 or 10 gallon pot, or should I go bigger, say 20 gallons? Will boiling 5 gallons in a 20-gallon pot cause a change in flavor? Currently, I cool with a homemade wort chiller, small coil in ice, daisy chained to a larger coil. I could cool the wort to 65 degrees in 45 minutes. Will an upgrade be required for larger batches? Maybe saying at 5 to 6 gallon batch size is not a bad idea. All right, so he's got a two-part. See if we can tackle that that portion maybe. Um,
So the bigger pot for full wort boil. If you're gonna make 5 gallon batches, an 8 gallon pot is fine. If you're gonna make 10 gallon batches, you need at least 15, 16 gallons of space. Yes, if you're boiling 5 gallons in a 20 gallon pot, it really depends on the diameter of the pot. So
Yeah.
if you have a
and the heat
really
source.
wide diameter pot, yeah, and the heat source, and you're boiling just a couple of inches of wort, it's probably going to change the flavor a bit. If you're, versus, 10-inch wide pot, then you're boiling, a deep thing. So everything's kind of like a, compromise. And ideally, you design a brewery to brew one volume of beer and even one gravity of beer, which is how most of the beer's been done for a long time. A lot of the lager brewers and stuff. So yeah, the wort chiller is gonna might need some upgrading, but it sounds like you've got it working pretty good right now. Maybe you throw in a extra coil or something. I don't know. Yeah, staying at the 5 to 6 gallon batch size is not a bad idea because unless you have a bunch of alcoholic friends, it's nice to be able to brew variety and have fresh beer. So
Yeah,
that's
so
my opinion.
it's 2 to 1 ratio, kind of single double in a single boil is I would say for most typical setups is probably pushing the extremes. You have to have enough control and enough attention, or you could have not like your output. Um, I'm not trying to sell you more equipment. Blickman does not send me a check, no matter how many times I ask. Um, yeah, see, you can do it with enough attention, and but if you're doing if you're 10 gallon setup, you like to use a 25, 30 gallon boil kettle because you know how that works. Cutting that in half could be hard to do. So like Jim was saying, it's definitely gonna depend on your setup, in my opinion. Um, John, were you ever a home brewer? Or are you just around like the big boys all the time?
I homebrewed back in the day. It's been, gosh, over 10 years, but
So did you ever try to scale up or down with the equipment you had, or can you kind of try to picture that in your head?
yeah, I had a 15 gallon kettle, and it was a pretty wide diameter, but I was able to get away with uh 5 gallon batches in that. I didn't do very many of them, but yeah, it was I had one of those wort chillers that was where all the coils are like
Tight.
tight down at the bottom, and so that worked
Hmm.
out. But if you have one of the really loosely coiled ones, then that would have been an
Mm.
issue.
Some of them are designed stepped off the bottom where most of the coils are at the top to try to get the
Mm,
coldest water circulating in the hottest wort.
All
And so
right.
that'd be a total failure if you cut your kettle size in half.
yeah, for sure.
Well, you can always pick up your coil, move it up and
Yeah,
down through the column.
right.
You
And
know,
Huggy, I know
that
you had
actually
the
helps accelerate things.
right. Yeah, you get the circulation around the coils better if you don't use the the Jamil patented Whirlpool design.
That's right.
Mhm.
Huggy, you had I'd say a summer's long doing pilot batches on back on Homebrew Kit. That was still
Hmm.
about 6, 7 years ago. Were you always brew? I mean, that was a nice setup. Were you always brewing the same size 10-gallon batches, or were you able to do
Yeah.
half of that?
Uh. Oh yeah, on that one. Yeah, yeah. That was 10 gallons. Yeah, because it was like a 12-gallon or 15-gallon setup. Um,
I
and
bet
I
those
would
could
do
have
it.
run
Yeah,
these 15s. Yeah,
maybe I can't remember, but yeah, I would do a 12-gallon or like a 12-gallon batch and then split it into two fermenters. But I did do a half batch on that. But yeah, you do get more boil off. Is the only concern with that.
and that was an all electric setup with temperature.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, with power percent control or no?
Um, Man, I don't remember. It was a Herms or Rims. I was confused the two. It went through the. I can't remember. It was one of the two, so it would recirculate. I remember I would recirculate when I'd mash in, but I would do a half batch size on that. I didn't see much of a difference in between the beers. I would say, half batch was a full batch on that size system. Just the
Yeah,
half batch was just almost as much time and effort for half the beer.
Hmm.
Maybe the
yeah.
cooling was a little faster and knockout was a touch faster, but it's a few minutes, so it wasn't. But yeah, I'm with Jamil. If unless you know a lot of people, even brewing 5 gallons at a time is a lot of beer to get rid of. If you have a homebrew club near you and you can share it, or a homebrew shop you can share it with, especially get feedback, I would do something like that. Yeah, keep it fresh, keep it rotating.
Competitions, send your bottles away.
Yeah,
Pay to
competition.
have
That's a good
someone
way
drink your
too.
beer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Pay someone to get rid of it. But you also get
Yeah.
good feedback on some of those.
So there's a lot of variables in that. Sorry, we couldn't be more definitive. Uh, I would brew the largest batch I could if I had something to do with the beer, just because the reward is there. And I'm not saying that's the answer to this question. I'm just saying me myself, if I could still reasonably move 10 gallons of beer without just drinking most of it, I'd probably still be in a 10-gallon batch.
I
But I'm
would
at five
I will
gallons
say
these
too,
days.
when I was doing those 10-gallon batches, I was splitting it between two fermenters.
Yep.
So I do two different yeasts, or I do a fruited beer with two different fruits or different dry hops. So that was a really nice, fast way to experiment and play around with splitting the batch. And then if you had, two 5-gallon fermenters, that's kind of the standard size. So a 10-gallon batch, even a 5-gallon batch, you could split that in half into two 5-gallon fermenters and have plenty of headspace.
Hmm.
But yeah, that was nice to split it like that.
Yeah.
All right. And so Joseph, I know you waited a while for us to answer the first half of your question. You have to wait a little longer, and we'll answer the second half of that question.
Maybe another 10 years.
Hey now. All right, everybody. Thanks for everyone who's listening in. A reminder, we are live on Facebook. The video that we are recording right now, where you get to see Jamila's lovely face that we have not seen in quite a while, on the video on Facebook for about 30 days, my understanding. Now they could change their rules, or I could be totally misunderstanding it, and you all can say, hey, he didn't know shit about beer or Facebook. We'll find out how that works out. Um, don't forget about our sponsor Blickman. They've sponsored us. How long, Jamil? How long has Whitman sponsored us?
It's got to be getting on 20 years. I don't know how long we've been doing this show.
Jeez. I mean, I can put up with you almost that long. We'll see if it lasts that
18
long.
years or so, I think. It's been a while.
Check out the website. They have specials. They haven't guess run. I would expect it's probably going to be something towards the end of summer, another special. But their equipment's a value at full price. I mean, so much of value that they tend to sell out. They haven't sold out as much lately. So don't last minute go try to buy some Blickman because you might be disappointed. This stuff's outstanding.
I think Drew's been improving, production flow maybe, and making sure it's more available. It's a great dude. If you get a chance, send an email to feedback@blickmanengineering.com. Drew will get it. And you just tell him, hey, thanks for sponsoring the show for the last 18 years and continuing to sponsor the show. Because they pay money, you don't have to pay to see the show. So I think that's pretty cool. And to do that for 18 years is pretty amazing. So, crack out the email, typey, feedback@blickmanengineering.com. Just say you appreciate it. That's all I'm asking.
Yes, absolutely.
Solid goal.
Yep. All right, everybody. Brew Strong.
Brew Strong.
Brew Strong.
Brew Strong.